Today we're gonna talk about some of the parts that we tend to skip a bit of when we're doing disaster preparedness, which we spend a whole lot of time in disaster response discussions talking about those first 2 hours. How are we gonna take care of injuries? How are we going to put out fires? How are we gonna rescue people? And we don't spend all that much time talking about the next day, week, months. And so that's what we're gonna look at today. We're gonna look at a couple of different aspects of it. We're gonna start off on a really individual and family level about what surviving is gonna look like in certain ways and some resources and things you might wanna think about now for your own personal preparedness. Then we're gonna step out a bit to our neighborhoods and what we can think about what these weeks and months will look like there. And then you're gonna get a few war stories from me. Hopefully you can deal with those, of some of the disaster responses I've been to and the ways that entire communities have come together to support the survivors of disasters so that you can think about what you might want to be doing. Because I'm pretty sure anyone who shows up in this room today isn't going to be just content making sure their family's set. If you're coming here, you want to learn more and maybe be able to make an impact on all of Berkeley or all of our area. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Sound good? Okay. So again, my name is Jennifer Lazo. I'm an emergency services coordinator for the city. So I am out of the fire department, but I am not a firefighter. I stand outside with a clipboard on occasion when they remember to call me. It's very exciting. And my main job is to do the planning and to do public awareness, to do work with all of you to make sure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be for doing disaster responses. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this is what we're used to when we're talking about earthquakes in particular. And we will talk a lot about earthquakes in the individual side, then we're going to jump out to sort of broader disasters as we go to the more community focus. But when we talk about disasters, we spend a whole lot of time thinking about what the first responders are going to do, how we can sort of make ourselves into mini first responders so we can help save our neighbors. And that's key. It's hugely important. But what's going to happen next? How are we going to help each other and recover as a community? First, I'm going to do some reminders. For those of you who have seen me speak on disaster preparedness before, a little bit of this first part is going to be a review, but it's always good to review this information. For most of us, the thing we are going to most desperately want in that first week after a disaster is information. We are going to want to know what has happened, where we can get help, what resources are available to us, where we can go for more support, how we can help our neighbors in more effective ways. So as a quick reminder, I want to talk about some of the communication systems that we will be using. One is AM 1610, if you haven't already heard that fabulous and fascinating radio station. Same 30 seconds over and over and over and over again. Right now it's me, I'm sorry, I accidentally deleted the old person saying it, so you get to hear my voice giving its call radio sign. But the important part of that radio station is it's entirely controlled by the city of Berkeley. We can update it using a satellite phone, so we don't need to use the internet in order to update the messages, and we can make them very directed at the people of Berkeley. You can say, here is where you can get medical assistance. Here is where you can get food and water. Here is where you can get shelter. Because one of the things we do not know in Berkeley is exactly where those places will be, because it's going to depend on the disaster, especially in an earthquake. We do not want you going anywhere that's going to make you less safe than where you already are. So that's going to be one of our key methods of communicating. Another really important system is AC Alert. This is the one I talk about every single presentation I do because we want to make sure everyone's signed up. So let's start with that question. Who is already signed up for AC Alert? That's a pretty good, like 60% of the room, I'd say. Not bad. AC Alert is the City of Berkeley and Alameda County's emergency alerting system. It is the way that we can push messages to you. And the cool thing about this system, it is pretty new for us. It's the replacement for BENS, if you heard of BENS before. This is the new version. And it does everything BENS could do plus more. It's very exciting. So the plus more is you can now opt in to categories to receive more information from us if you want to hear from us more often. Usually we used our old emergency alerting system only if there was life-saving information for you as the recipient. So if you were going to get a message that would save your own life, then we'd send it out. Happily, we don't have to send those messages out very often. So most people never got a Ben's message except the once a year when we tested it. However, this system, we can send out lower level messages. For example, when there was a fire up in the hills on the same day that the Santa Rosa fires came out on Ajax, we were able to send a message out to the people who'd subscribed, but we didn't have to push it out to everyone because we didn't need anyone to evacuate at that point in time. So that's the kind of messages that you can sign up for. The other thing I do want to mention about this system is it does have the capability to do what we call WEA alerts, or wireless emergency alerts. Those are the ones that make your cell phone make a sound it's never made before in its life. Generally, we get them for Amber Alerts. It's the same system. We can send those messages through the county. So we have that capability, but we would only use that in a really big emergency because you don't want your phone going off for every little thing that happens in Berkeley. I know. So please sign up for AC Alert. Here's a tip for signing up for AC Alert. For reasons that flummox me, the acalert.org website directs you to the login page, not the sign up page. So if you go to acalert.org, you then need to look at the top of the page and hit the sign up button, and that's how you sign up for it. Otherwise, you're going to put your email address in and it will say email not recognized, and you'll get very frustrated. And that's just because you haven't already signed up yet. You have to sign up first, then you can log in and change your settings. Yes?
So you were saying something about the wireless
emergency alerts.
So is signing up for AC Alert an automatic sign up for wireless?
So you don't actually have to sign up for wireless emergency alerts. That's what makes them fancy. But if you want, but we will only use those if sort of all of Berkeley is burning down. So if you want to get messages for anything lower than all of Berkeley is burning down, then you want to sign up for this system.
For AC Alert.
For AC Alert.
How do you get on the list for the wireless alerts?
You buying a cell phone.
Oh, so any cell
Yes,
phone.
all cell phones get wireless emergency alerts.
Now, is that the same as Nixle, the police department?
That's a really good question. Thank you for bringing that up. So is that the same as Nixle, was the question. It is not the same as Nixle. Nixle existed as a system before we got AC Alert. I hope in 2 years they will come back to you and say, they are all one system. We're not there yet. We're working on it. The police department uses Nixle, and they use it far more frequently, especially for crime-related events. So there was a missing person alert that went out on Nixle today, for example, which had something they want you to do, but you don't need to do anything to protect yourself based on that information. So that's sort of the distinction. The fire department uses AC Alert. We will try in any circumstance to use both systems to send out messages if they're a big deal. We'll use AC Alert first though, because that's the one designed for emergency alerting. So Nixle, I would say, is good but not sufficient. So it's a lower source of information. Yes?
You're making the assumption that you will have cell phones working.
That's a great question. So I am not making that assumption, and that's why I've got about 8 different kinds of communication systems up here. And so my big point about this is we need to think of a lot of different ways to get information. And so if you sign up for as many as possible, then we're going to be much safer. So some other places you might find information. This next one is resource flyers where we're doing services. So if there's a shelter set up, they're going to know what's going on. They're going to have some information at that front desk. So even if you're perfectly safe in your home, you may be able to go to that shelter and get the most recent updates about what's happening. We might have service centers open. We might have medical clinics open. Those will be places to go look for information if everything else is down. Send somebody on a bike, that teenager who's really fast at speeding through all of the streets every day and to sort of drive you crazy, may be your best resource after something like an earthquake, that they go out and find the information and bring it back. So that will be another kind of place we look for information. I am a huge advocate of neighborhood bulletin boards in times after disasters, having one central location so that neighborhood kid who's found the information, everyone knows where they can go find the latest updates. Or maybe I will tell you, AM 1610, you can't hear it everywhere in Berkeley. It's not the strongest radio station in the world. So maybe one person gets the message, writes down some notes, posts them for the entire community to see. So having a place in your own local block where you can share that information during an emergency is a really great idea so that everybody can get the information that someone's gathering. Yes? I mean, I'm going way old school. I mean a super physical bulletin board after an earthquake. Maybe it's on somebody's door, maybe it's on the side of a pop-up tent. I don't really care how you do it, but having one place that people can go to gather that kind of centralized information is key. There are some other things I want to bring up on the social media end of things. And we're going to talk about why I talk about social media in a little bit when we talk about some infrastructure questions. But social media often becomes a key source of information, especially because the earthquake is a big disaster we face here. It's not the only one. So for things like the wildfires, for things like flooding, for things like a hazmat spill or a hazmat release, or a plane crashes somewhere or a big truck crashes and causes a fire. For all of those things, it is highly likely that we will have an ability to get online and gather some information. So even in the Santa Rosa fires, they had problems with their internet connectivity. It was almost entirely back after 3 days. So that gives you an idea that they definitely had immediate problems, but it becomes one of the quicker sources of information over time. Don't want it to be your only source, but it can be a source. So let's jump forward and ask my favorite quiz question. By the way, there is no one correct answer to this. It's a thought experiment kind of question. What utilities do we think are going to come back the fastest? Guesses. What do we think? Telephone, cell phone. Landlines, I'm going to give an and maybe. It sort of depends. Cell phones, I'm going to give a higher rating than I ever had before. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of things that can essentially be flown in and set up to bring back some cell phone service. It may not be everything. It's almost certainly not going to be data. But the ability to send a text message or do a phone call within a couple of days, I think we'll get back, especially because half of those resources live in the Silicon Valley, so they're going to want to come help us. Yeah, what else? Landlines, I know that there's sort of an ever-changing technology. They can be a really good resource. They worked really, really well for some people up in Santa Rosa. They were sort of the last thing standing, but a lot of them also got cut in Santa Rosa. They had problems with the infrastructure line, and and landline technology is being abandoned by the telecom systems. And so that is an ongoing issue that's happening. And so again, I don't want it to be the only thing you're relying on. So it's the no one system concept that we're going for. So I think very likely you'll have the ability to do some kind of call pretty rapidly. And by rapidly, I mean in a couple of days. I don't mean in a couple of hours. Second up, I think, will probably be electricity. That's going to start coming back within a week or two. And then what's going to take the longest? What do we think? Water and gas, right? Those are going to take forever. Yes?
Do you want to make a distinction between landline phones that do or don't depend on
Voice over.
database?
Yes. So if you are going to use a landline phone as one of your emergency communication systems, it needs to be a landline phone that does not have any electricity going to it. So you shouldn't need to plug in a voicemail. And it shouldn't have any reliance on the internet. It needs to be just into a phone jack. That is the kind of phone that it's still not guaranteed, but it may provide another network of communication after a disaster. Yeah.
Not cordless.
Not cordless, yeah. No, nothing that requires any kind of power. So it should be like the oldest, deadest, saddest phone that you keep in your house. But you know what? For that one time, it can be a huge method to help you out. All right, so we've talked about coming back the fastest, coming back the longest, and now comes to this question of what coping mechanisms are you going to need? So let's jump into that. Here are three of my favorites. First, let me jump into the ones on the right. So some of this is creativity. We're going to need to get creative. Now, before I encourage you to turn on your propane grill, allow me to make sure that there are not any gas leaks in your neighborhood. Please check first. Have some people walk around, do some smelling, but we're talking about these weeks after disasters, right? The gas will get cut off in those first couple of days. And then we'll have to watch for aftershocks, because that could release other things. But generally, our propane grills are gonna be incredible resources for actually having warm food, right? Even a camping stove that you might have, the key thing there is not using them inside, because they will create fumes that can cause a lot of problems. Not even using them near a window. That could be like, oh, we've got a little cover here, it's right near the window, or it's in the garage, the door is open. That is not enough ventilation. They need to be fully outside, and they need to be used safely and not during high winds, please. Another one there is my new favorite toy, which is my like super duper cell phone backup battery. That, for those of you who haven't, they have those little chargers for cell phones that you can usually get maybe one cell phone charge out of. Nowadays, for 30 or 40 bucks, I'm not telling you any one type, they have what I like personally call a charging brick that can get you 8 or 9 recharges on a single cell phone. They're not that expensive, they're totally worth having, and they make camping trips a much more comfortable experience if you know you're gonna have an emergency method of communication, even if your cell phone has trouble finding a signal out there. Okay, now let's talk about this big one here, water. It took me a while to find a good water picture for this slide, because what I want to explain is how we're going to, some of the methods we may use to distribute water when the water pipes are down. Because you have heard, and I have told you before, it's gonna be months before the water distribution system is back to normal, right? So that means the ability to go to your sink and turn it on. That's what we really want. And even if the water distribution system is working, if we've had a lot of fires that have been happening in an area, the way that our hydrant systems work, it can flush some bad stuff into our drinking water, and so you may have to do some water protection stuff. I actually have 2 flyers on this, so we'll get to that in a second. But the first thing I want to point out is my toy. I got something new at a conference and it made me really excited, so I brought it to show it to you. This is not something I use to store water long term. There's a reason it's empty. What it does do is it holds a gallon of water. It's got a nice convenient little handle at the top. I could carry it down the street, or I could put it in a bag, or I could tug it in a suitcase, and I could go to a place where a truck like that was set up with a bunch of faucets, fill this up, and then take it home with me. That's gonna be what day-to-day life looks like if our water systems go down. It's going to be trucks like that once we get the roads back open, which will be a key priority. Trucks like that will come in, people will have containers to fill up water. You will be a much happier person if you already have some containers to fill up water. The pictures I was looking at online for this kind of stuff had people with just, buckets for watering plants and stuff like that to fill up their water. I didn't want to show you that. I wanted to show you something like this. I want you to think about methods that you could take water and distribute it. And I'll pass this around. I am not specifically advertising for this exact container. I just want you to get the concept that there are containers that can hold water that can be mobile, that can be a solution as we set up water distribution systems throughout the area that you will likely have to go and travel to, or have a neighbor go and travel to and pick up water for several people. So this is one of those what day-to-day living could look like in those weeks and months after. Not always the most pleasant, but it is almost a little reassuring to think that we have thought about this a bit. Okay, but we need you to think about it a bit too. How would you get water? What would be a good way? Are you gonna need a cart to take it with you? I really love the idea of using a rolling suitcase. I sort of know how much I can tote there. I know I can get right up to 49.5 pounds on Southwest, right? So how can I hold some water in there? So let me go ahead and pass this around. I'm also handing out 2 flyers, so let me just tell you what's getting handed out right now. And I printed 40, which I was sure was gonna be plenty, but Lynn will print some or distribute some more to everybody who's here.
Do you have these in electronic format?
I do have these in electronic format.
I'll put them on the website and then we can just go and.
Yeah, so let me just explain what's on them and then I'll answer questions. These 2 flyers are talking about 2 specific concepts. One of these concepts is where to look for water, different potential sources of water. The other concept is how to make water safe. And it addresses the #1 question that I get when I'm teaching disaster preparedness classes, which is concentrations of bleach and how much bleach to water you need to put for safe drinking water. It is in the flyer. they are going to get it far more right than I am when I try to spout off the numbers, because it's a very distinct, it's a cooking problem. So please look at these flyers. They've got some useful information. They have some sources. We'll talk about some other sources of water in a second, but I just wanted to make sure you had some resources you could take with you. Think about water. Okay, this was the first question I saw, then I'll come back here.
So realistically, how long would it be from the disaster to the availability of this potable water truck?
That's a really great question. The question was, how long is it going to take for when the disaster happens to when we start pulling these water trucks up? I wish I could give you a really distinct answer. That would be awesome. But it's going to depend on a lot of stuff. It's going to depend on how some of our highways hold up, on how some of our roads are doing. There may be some other systems that are the in-between. They can airdrop a bunch of water bottles, right? That's something they can do with no roads going into different areas. It's not a sustainable solution, but it's a short-term solution that'll get you somewhere. But what we really want people to be thinking of, especially those of you who are coming here to learn more about disaster preparedness, is if you can get yourself at least enough water to get you through the first week, you're gonna be in much, much better shape. How much water is that? It's at least a gallon of water per person and a pet a day. So your pets count too, give them their gallons. So that's generally 7 gallons of water per person. And so you wanna either cycle that water. There's ways, if you're not doing special storage solutions for your water, if you're just buying it off the grocery shelf, you need to look at its expiration date and follow that expiration date and switch out the water. Or you can store it in long-term storage solution problems. I know that this group has worked on long-term water storage solutions. So I'd direct you to ask some of the expert leaders to show you some of the ways that they store water, because I know that they do awesome things. So storing water is key. Let me jump over here with a question. Yeah.
This is just actually a suggestion.
Excellent.
It gets so confusing about the number of drops
Yes, it does.
by the percentage of bleach. I went to CVS and I got myself eyedroppers and I took blue tape and I taped the eyedroppers to the bleach bottle. Now I can use this as a percentage and tell myself how many drops would actually be in the bottle.
That's brilliant. So I'm going to repeat this incredible solution. This water bleach solution question is really challenging. It involves math. And I know it sort of always flummoxes me a little bit, which is why I printed out the flyers. But what Jenny was suggesting is that she's gotten some droppers that she's already pre-shown on the dropper how much bleach she'd need, takes the dropper onto the bleach, has the instructions taped on there. Now it's all in one place. She doesn't have to go figuring it out in the middle of an earthquake, which I think is an excellent, excellent idea. Yes.
But it did say approximately a little less than a quarter of a teaspoon to a gallon. Couldn't I do a teaspoon and then a little more than a gallon of water? Be okay.
Yes.
And then how long can I store tap water in a pretty sturdy hard plastic?
So for storing tap water, there's a couple of things you need to think about. You need to make sure that the container is designed for long-term storage of tap water. So my super short-term solution that I use when I just need to have some water, and if I don't have long-term water storage containers, is I'll use an old a juice container, an old soda container. Do not use an old milk container because you cannot get the milk out enough. Clean it out, fill it with water, and then the original expiration date of that soda or juice, that plastic is going to be good until then. Then I can use that water to water my plants and use another recycled container. So that is a short-term solution. If you're going to store your water for more than 6 months, then you need to put a stabilizer into the water so that it doesn't start molding inside there. So you need to look into a little bit more, do a little more research on how to stabilize that water. It is essentially a bleach solution that you're making so that it stays safe. Yes.
I've purchased something called blue can water. It's got a 50-year shelf life.
Mm-hmm.
The cans are double-lined.
Yeah, there are a lot of incredible water solutions out there on the internet. So if you want to invest some money into just getting some long-term water storage and you have the space to store it, it can be a worthwhile investment. I can't say any one company is great, better than others, but please talk to each other, because I know a lot of folks in this room have done some work on this, and they've done some really good and found some good resources and vendors that they trust.
I just wanted to say it was $23 a case.
$23 a case. Excellent. Okay, yes, over here.
Two questions. First, will the water be rationed when the trucks come around?
Will the water be rationed? So there's going to be an amount per person. Now, if you're representing several people, you're going to be able to take water back for people, because that's what we want our neighborhoods to do. We want them to help each other. We want them to help the person who can't come and get the water. But there will have to be some systems to make sure that until we get a pipeline ongoing, that you're not going with all the water. But conveniently, water is really heavy, so it's hard to leave with all of the water.
The other question
Yes.
is, I store water in my car,
Yeah,
but it's baking in the sun.
yes it is.
So, I don't know.
You store water in the car and it's baking in the sun. And yes, my car water is, so my car, if you walked into it right now, it's parked right out the street, you would find a water bottle in every cup holder, because I'm that kind of paranoid person. And half that water is probably to drink. Would I drink it if I really needed to? Yeah. It's something you're going to want to cycle out more, and it's something that you're going to want to think about how you're storing. Really, for car water, none of it's going to be great just because it gets so hot in our cars. But having at least some there is really, really important. Heck, it saved the day when I've gone on a run and realized I should have brought some more water with me. So, yeah. Yes.
So I think you were indicating that like for a juice or some other kind of bottle, you shouldn't plan on using the container itself. What about the kind, and I understand like you should cycle the water periodically,
Yes.
Longer storage, term storage. What I'm asking about are the kind of heavier plastic that are camping containers that hold, 5 or 7 gallons.
That's a good question. So we talked about cycling your normal sort of grocery store water containers. And just to be clear, the reason we're doing that isn't because the water goes bad, it's because the container goes bad. So it starts degrading into the water. But what about something like a camping container that's designed to hold water for a longer period of time? The main thing you need to do is look at the instructions or what's written on the container for how long it's supposed to store it, and follow those. So for example, the bag I'm passing around, when I asked the people, they said, oh, it shouldn't be stored in there for more than a week. It's not designed for long-term storage. So you need to make sure you're looking at what the instructions are for that thing. You can look almost anything up online and find their specs and see what they're designed for, and I really recommend following that and finding things so you have the right tool for the job that you're trying to do. Yes?
So are you saying the bleach will take out whatever, there is whatever the amoebas and all that? Because my family was from Puerto Rico and I did a lot of research on water purifying devices. And so I found a lot of good options at REI, and the cheapest option was just to get these great little tablets. So you don't have to put the little drops.
Yeah, there are some concentrated methods for doing similar things. There's a lot of stuff out there on the market.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah, so there are tablets out there. There's some pre-made water storage stuff. There's bleach. I want to give you a lot of options so that you can do the thing that works best for you and your family. Yeah.
And there's the water straw.
There's the water straw. The one thing I'm going to point out about a lot of these purification things is it means you have to have water. Okay, and the bay water is not what you want to be using any of this on, let's be clear. The bay is, or even our streams. So the main thing that you're trying to think of is safely storing water yourself. That's really where I want you to focus. When we talk about something like a boil water notice, which could come out especially after something like a big fire, that's when we'll be giving more distinct instructions about here's what you have to do to take what's coming out of the pipes and make it safe. Or even if water's been out for a while and we have to restore it, we also might have a water storage, water boil order then. So that's sort of a different category of purifying water as opposed to when you just don't have anything coming out of the pipes. That's when you need stored water. Okay, I'm gonna do 2 more questions and we're gonna move on, all right? Yes, in the back.
Hot water heaters, a great source of water.
Yep.
And it helps to have a little hose to be able to drain it.
Right, and one thing I will say about filling up water, thank you for reminding me, water heaters are great. For some reason I put my slides in a silly order because I have another slide that shows places you can get water. You don't expect it in like 2 slides, so we're almost there. But if you're gonna fill up a container and you're not doing it directly in the sink or directly at a pipe, you don't wanna use a garden hose to fill up a water container. You wanna use a food grade hose, they're white. You can get a short one. That's an excellent thing to get for a neighborhood because you don't have to use it that often. But if that one person on the block has it and everyone can borrow it when they need to change out their water supplies, getting a white food grade hose is a good sort of block investment. It's not that expensive, it's just silly for everyone to have one because they're not used that much. Okay, there was one more question in the back. And then I promise we'll answer more questions at the end, so write them down. We're gonna come back. Yes, sir.
Okay, when will we hear that it's safe to flush the toilet?
When will you?
Until then.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you for asking my favorite question. For those of you who've seen me do these presentations, you know. What about flushing toilets? When will we know that we can do it? Well, you can try. You're just not going to have a lot of success for a while. So here's the problem. Our sewer systems are designed so that they need a certain amount of water flowing through them for stuff to move through the system. And so if all of the water is down, stuff isn't going to flow through the system. Okay, so even if you were able to flush it, bad things will start happening pretty rapidly in our sewer system. Therefore, it is highly likely after something like an earthquake that you are going to need to figure out some alternative methods of using the restroom. Let me give you a couple of different options. For those, and I live in an apartment, so I promise I'm gonna have an apartment option in here because not all of these work. Option number 1 is the old-fashioned camping option. You choose the corner of your yard where you're digging a hole, probably next to the neighbor you like a little bit less than this other neighbor, right? Make yourself a little tent, you know, set yourself up and do your own business. Now they sell some really convenient disaster kits that actually have a toilet seat right on top of them. That's something, and you can just use bags with those. That's one option. I've definitely heard camping toilets are a good option for some people. But my personal favorite option for if you need to create an alternative method of using the bathroom involves using your own bathroom. So, step 1 is once all the water is out of your toilet, your entire toilet system, you turn it off so that more water can't flow in by accident. You do not want any surprise water in this circumstance. Step 2, you line the bowl of the toilet with 3 or 4 heavy-duty trash bags so that nothing's going down into the piping of the toilet. Step 3, you turn your toilet into a kitty litter box.
What?
Kitty litter box. You put kitty litter in there, a whole supply. If you haven't had a cat, ask a cat owner. They can describe this process for you. So there's a pretty thick layer of it. Then you can use the toilet, throw a little more kitty litter on top. It will help absorb the smell. It'll make it a lot more pleasant to clean up than just a bag. And then it's sort of reusable. My favorite part of it is it means in the middle of the night when I'm stumbling out of my bed and need to use the toilet, I don't have to go into a corner of the yard to do so. I am already set. I don't have to think about bags. I can just use my little kitty litter toilet. Now, the thing all the plumbers want me to remind you of is please do not put any kitty litter actually into your septic system or sewage system. It will be very sad. It does not, you're not supposed to flush kitty litter down the toilet or anything like that. So that's why you use those trash bags. But it's a pretty cheap option. And it's a little bit more pleasant than a lot of those other options. So that's my personal favorite, to each their own. Okay, gonna jump forward. We're gonna talk about food for a second. This is another slide that I can provide us some source information because it's a little hard to read where it is. But there's a couple of key concepts I want us to talk about with food safety when the power goes out. First one is, how long is your fridge good? One way to know for sure is to actually have temperature gauges in your fridge. Then you know when it gets over a certain temperature, because it's gonna look a little different now than it looked in, when was it actually warm here? It was warm in September. So at different temperatures outside are gonna have different things of how quickly your fridge gets hot. But in general, the CDC guidelines say that after about 4 hours, you need to start worrying about the stuff in your fridge. you need to start thinking about it. Now, you might be able to shift stuff over to a cooler with some ice and keep things cool, but you need to start worrying about it. If you have a temperature gauge, you could actually look at that temperature gauge and see when it starts getting too warm. And then for your freezer, as it says on here, you've got about 48 hours, if it is pretty well packed up. So it says a full freezer will hold it for 48 hours. A half full freezer is only gonna hold it for 24 hours because you've got essentially the ice in the freezer that's helping keep your freezer cold. It's its own self-circulating system. So one of my favorite things to do, now this depends on your own household fridge, so think about that, but an excellent place if you have space in there to store your extra water is in your fridge and freezer, because then it stays cold and it helps keep your fridge and freezer cold, and it's not taking up space that you're otherwise using. So for those of you who have extra space, I know my mom's fridge, and this is not an option I offered her. So, you know, for each their own, but picture your fridge if you've got some space. It's actually, as long as the air can circulate in your freezer, so you don't want to go completely jam-packed. You need to have some air circulation. Having a mostly full freezer actually makes it more energy efficient as well. So it's good all the way around. It helps with all of our different goals. I'm going to share the links for these pictures because, as I said, they're sort of hard to read. The other comment that's on here is what you can save in your fridge when the power's been out, what things are still safe to eat versus which ones do you need to throw away. The big thing is store meat on the bottom level, because anything meat touches and drips as it gets cool, it ruins, and you can't use it anymore. So even if it was something like a mustard container, which is really going to be fine, even if the fridge goes out, if it had meat drip on it, it's not going to be fine anymore. So that's the big concept there. As I promised, alternative clean water sources. The water heater is the first one. Tankless water heaters will not help you. Sorry. I know that they're lovely and they make your shower fast and hot and lovely, but they're not a water storage device. But normal water heaters are. Melted ice, and that's that idea of putting some ice bottles into your freezer is a great one. The toilet tank, not the toilet bowl. The toilet tank is a good source of water, okay? So go ahead and pull water out of there right after something. You can store it in, you know, some jugs or some pitchers and stuff like that. That is usable water. The stuff in the back, not the stuff on the bottom. And then this is one that was on some of the information I was looking up today just to make sure I had everything covered, which is canned fruit and vegetable juice and the liquid from canned goods can be a source of liquid. This is only if it's not a super salty canning solution. But some, you know, if you've got corn, right, that's not generally that salty. That can be some liquid that you use there. So that's something to think about, you know, mangoes that are canned, you've got some liquid in there that can be drunk. And just as a reminder, water is great. Water is important. Juice has water in it. So it has, you know, there's a lot of things that have water in it. So just because you don't have just pure water, it's okay to have a variety of flavors to your water. They count as part of your disaster supplies. And then my last note is, if you can only store one thing, store water. I think you've sort of gotten that concept here. This is my big thing for you to store. All right. As I promised, we're thinking about what's happening in these days and weeks after. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the cleaning up part. Here's the part we almost never get to when we talk about disasters. There are 2 waves of injuries after earthquakes. The first wave is actually caused by the shaking. The second wave is caused by people trying to clean up. A huge number of people cut themselves, get hurt trying to clean up supplies from an earthquake. And so you really want to make sure that you've planned and are prepared for that cleanup. So you want to have some supplies there, heavy-duty gloves, garbage bags. Now, this is my new favorite thing. 3 months ago, if I said the word N95 masks, I got this blank look from the entire audience. Now everyone's eyes light up because the frantic search for the N95 mask was a universal Bay Area experience in October. So allow me to recommend, they're back in stock. You might want to get some now. They're a lot easier to get now than they will be after What N95 masks are designed to do is filter out 95% of the things in the air. They're not just going to be useful after wildfires. They'll also be useful if you're in a dusty environment, for example, where there's a lot of stuff in the air after an earthquake because everything's gotten shaken out. They will not protect you 100%. They will also not protect you well if they don't have a good fit on your face. So the idea is supposed to be that they are fitting pretty hard on your face. A surgical mask will do nothing. It gets you nowhere. So you want to have a couple of straps. It's great if it has a little valve on it. It doesn't have to. The valve generally makes it more comfortable for wearing long term because it keeps it from getting sort of as hot inside of the mask. That's why some people like the ones with the valves more. The one I wore when I was up in Santa Rosa, I didn't have a valve. I was fine. But I was mainly wearing it just while I was outside, not when I was inside. Okay, so all of those things, supplies to have now. Other things to think about. I got my third sheet that I have to pass out is the now sheet, which is things that you might need if you have earthquake insurance. That's a huge if here in California. So insurance, our normal insurance policies do not cover earthquakes. They won't cover any of the damage from earthquakes. I am not going to tell you to get insurance because that is way beyond my scope as a City of Berkeley employee, but I will say looking into what the benefits and costs are may be worth it for your family. It's something for you to consider. If you do have earthquake insurance, and by the way, there is a renter's version of earthquake insurance that is much cheaper. It's pretty expensive for a homeowner. For a renter, it's super cheap because it's just doing your contents inside your house. So if you have insurance, it's going to be super important to have proof of what was destroyed. So you can clean stuff up, you can put it into a bag, but you don't necessarily want to throw it away yet. So that was one concept. And this is a concept too. If, say you have storm damage and you're going to make an insurance claim, same idea there. Or you have fire damage and you're going to make an insurance claim. So we're talking mostly about earthquakes today, but there are other disasters that most of us probably do have some insurance coverage for. So your instinct is to just get it all out of this house. I want to clean up from this crisis. Clean up, but keep the stuff as proof to your agent that stuff was actually destroyed. Some talks about repairing homes. You're going to want to be, this is the advice I've seen, which is board windows, tarp problem areas, but don't do anything that's going to make you unsafe. If it's not safe for you to get into an area to try and keep your home a little safer, don't touch it. There is a major thing in the disaster recovery stage, which is suddenly out of the woodwork climb all sorts of experts in earthquake repair. It's remarkable given how little earthquake repair we've had to do in this country where all of these experts come from. But you really want to be careful to check the licensing of contractors if you are paying someone to fix your house after a disaster. Because a bad job can actually void insurance claims as well. People not doing well, if you get somebody who's not licensed, it can be a scam. And so that's one of the things, think a little bit about now. There are websites to check licenses, and when we were talking about all those ways to get information, that the state is going to come in with people who you can walk up to at an assistance center and say, hey, this is who I'm thinking of hiring. Can you check in your database and make sure they're okay? That's the kind of thing that you'll be able to do, and that's a best practice, something to think about before there's a sort of desperate moment after a disaster. I unfortunately see this a lot in house fires. If you didn't know, if you've anyone who has anyone here done house fire response? No, okay, yeah. There's this sort of crazy thing that happens, which is within about 2 hours of a house fire, suddenly there'll be 3 or 4 contractors at that address saying, I will board up your house. It's incredible how quickly that happens. They just appear out of nowhere. They're listening to the scanners, they're listening to the radios, they're listening for fire reports, and they show up at the address where the fire was. Some of them are legit, some of them less so. Generally, for a fire in particular, you want to check with your insurance company to make sure whoever is going to do that job is going to be paid for by your insurance company. But the same concept happens in little disasters to big disasters. So it's just trying to protect yourself as you go through this. Again, this is the stuff we generally don't get to. We generally talk about this first few hours. Yes?
With regards to contractors, they are capable, if they're licensed, to make the repairs. They are not always, and very rarely are, capable of determining what repairs are needed. And in addition, some of the earthquake policies provide for code enhancement. And I think you need to talk to an engineer or architect.
I completely
for
agree.
Doing more than emergency repairs.
Right. You want to do the stuff that makes it the emergency things to sort of stabilize the situation so it doesn't get worse on the next aftershock. But then you really want to talk to experts about what's going on. You want to make somebody who really understands what happens inside the building. An engineer and architect would be good things after an earthquake, because there can be a lot of hidden damage. I know I grew up in LA. They found Northridge earthquake damage 5-10 years after, because no one had looked at the right beam in the right way. And so you need somebody who's really looking there to make sure that you are going to be doing what needs to be done to keep your house safe, because you don't want to have something hidden away in there.
And we recently moved back to the area, and we had a structural engineer specialized in the earthquake stuff. He said if you have limited resource, I asked about earthquake insurance. He said, well, first let me take a look at your house, because there's a lot more that can often be done into a structure to beef it way up and best money spent, because the insurance only will provide for what on MLS can list as that number of bedrooms. It won't restore our particular floors or
Right.
ceiling or something. And so it was worth a minimal amount to pay a guy to
Yeah.
tell us what else could be done, or if we'd already maxed out on that.
If you haven't had a mitigation person come and talk to you folks recently, I would highly recommend it, because there are a lot of really not terribly expensive things that can be done beforehand that can make it so your building is going to have a much more higher chance of making it through an earthquake and keeping you safe in it. So it's the kind of thing that you want to look at. You want to talk to experts, make sure they're licensed, make sure they know what they're doing, get some good referrals, talk to people, make sure you're finding someone who's good. All right, I'm going to jump forward here to one other insurance thing. So this is the other handout that you folks got. Now this is the weirdest handout I'm giving you, but I'm giving it to you because it's excellent, even though it's from New Zealand. So there is one handout in there that has a New Zealand website address. I do not particularly advise going to the New Zealand website address, because it will not tell you much about your own insurance, but the advice about how to take pictures of your house for insurance claims is excellent. So here's the big picture. In order to make a claim in your insurance, you have to prove you had the thing first, which can become a huge, huge pain. I've been reading and talking to a lot of folks up in Santa Rosa, and this is the horrifying task they are literally going through right now. They're going bedroom through bedroom, drawer through drawer, usually in their head, and trying to say, okay, 15 pairs of socks, 8 blouses, this much each, this many DVDs, this many collectibles, right? They're trying to itemize every single thing in their house that is gone. It's just sort of a horrifying idea. However, there are things we can do today that make this less bad. And that is go into your house, take pictures with every cabinet door open, with every drawer open, of every wall, ceiling, and floor. Get all those little nooks and crannies. Either put it on the cloud or put it on a memory stick and give it to a loved one so it's not in your house. So it's somewhere else. That's going to make your job infinitely easier for making any kind of claim. And this is, again, anything from a house fire to a flood to an earthquake. So this is a really important protective action that you can take to keep yourself safe and to help make it so your life's a little bit easier if something bad happens. Then after the shaking, before you start cleaning up, and again, true for any disaster, take another set of pictures of the damage. This is when you feel almost like a disaster tourist. If you're taking pictures of everything that went wrong, you need those pictures. Those are your proof. Then you can start cleaning up. But you want to take a picture of what it looked like before you cleaned up. Okay? Aftershocks happen in earthquakes. You might have to do another set. I personally would sort things in different ways. So you want to start with taking a picture of your front address for all of these. You're going to want to use the same sort of pattern. You may even write pieces of paper that says like living room here, kitchen here, just so it's a little easier to sort through them. You know which ones are in which bedroom. And then if you're doing an after a disaster, you're gonna wanna have something to indicate the date. Now, a lot of our digital cameras have a date indicator in the back end of the picture, so it's very easy to find. But say your digital camera has no battery charge, but you've still got that old film camera, great. Just make sure you've got the dates on there somewhere. All right? Any questions on that one? So that's one of the fact sheets that I shared, has some more information about how to take those pictures in effective ways. Yes?
How would you document the date?
Honestly, I would even just write it out. It's not so much proof, it's so that you remember when you did it. We're not like doing hostage videos with newspapers. We're not quite at that stage. Really, I think the vast majority of us are going to take these pictures with phones that will provide dates on the back ends of the pictures. So it's probably not that big of a deal. It's just to help jog your memory. The dates are going to start blurring together. It's going to get really easy for you to sort of forget what was when.
Yeah, most digital cameras have that capability, but you might not know it because it's in what they call metadata.
Exactly. So you're saying most of these cameras have this capability. It's the metadata. So it's not something you usually see unless you're going in the back end of the picture. Okay, let's keep moving. One more recovery resource I want you to know about now. And then after that, we'll be done with the individual set, and we're going to jump over to the neighborhood and community set. So there's going to be something called local assistance centers or disaster recovery centers. They're different based on which agency is running them. Local assistance centers are generally the state. Disaster recovery centers are generally the feds, the FEMA. So this is where the money comes, yay. First of all, I need to tell you, it's not gonna make you whole, especially after an earthquake. There will not be enough money to make everybody be able to rebuild their houses, especially in a place as expensive as Berkeley. Generally, the maximum number is somewhere around $32,000 for any disaster claim. That's the most that you could get. That's not guaranteed by any way, shape, or form. That's if all of your paperwork is perfect and everything matches up and you fit all of the different parameters. So, something to think about now. Know it now. Conveniently, there's a whole lot of these open right now, so I could actually go to their websites and pull some information. This is the kind of information you'll have to bring with you to a local assistance center. AKA, this is the kind of information you should have in a kit that someone else is holding for you out of the area that they can then get to you after the earthquake. Right? So copies of these kinds of forms are the kinds of things that you will need to help start the recovery process. I'm going to make this PowerPoint available, I promise. Okay, let's jump up to neighborhoods. We spent a whole lot of time talking about our own families, which is great. But resilience and recovery really happens at a neighborhood and community level. And that is where the strength of a group like this can really do incredible and amazing things. So we talked a little bit about information and resource sharing. That's going to be the number one thing that I hope every block in Berkeley does, is talk to each other and share the information they have and help each other find the information they need. Ongoing check-ins. It's going to be really easy and sort of fun to check in those first few hours, to knock on people's door. Did you make it through okay? Yes, excellent. Okay, we have saved the block. We're good. Everyone's safe. 3 days later is when things are really going to start getting tricky. That is when a person who may have a loved one who usually cares for them, who usually gets their groceries or takes them to the doctor, and that person hasn't been able to get into the region yet because the roads are still so bad. That's when they're going to need your help. So on day one, they're going to say, oh, I'm fine. Yep, I've got everything I need. We're going to need to keep on checking in on each other and keep on being accountable to each other and helping each other out. And so at that time in your neighborhood, you may make a system. This person may not want you to check in on them. They say, okay, once every 3 days you can knock on my door, or I'll put a little Post-it note on my door saying, I'm still fine, right? You're gonna come up with a system that works the best for you in your neighborhood. It's gonna look different everywhere. I know some neighborhoods that love I'm fine signs. They just love them. I know some who hate them with flaming passion because they're certain it's gonna be a target to say, come get me, I'm in my house after an earthquake. So this is up to your neighborhood. This is up to what kind of system you want to have to check in on each other, but you're going to be each other's best resources. In apartment buildings, I super love I'm Fine signs, because once you're in the building, you should probably be in there. Bridges to the vulnerable. And there's going to be people who were not particularly vulnerable before the earthquake, but who are now, who have new things that have happened. They've been injured in some way, or a good example, I wear contact lenses. You cannot tell this right now. When I do not have my contact lenses on, or my glasses, if I'm separated from them, I can't drive. I can sort of walk in a familiar place. I cannot walk if it's dark. I will trip over my own 2 feet. I am otherwise gonna look like I don't particularly need any help. But if I get separated from that very specific resource that I have, I'm gonna need a whole lot of help. And so that's the kind of thing that you're going to be checking in on each other. I'm going to show you some examples of what this can look like from some of the disasters I've responded to, because I have seen incredible neighbors helping their neighbors. Okay, so you're the best. The ongoing medical needs is the other thing. After you've got your water stored, please, please, please refill your medications a few days in advance. Give yourself a window so you don't run out the day of the earthquake. Always keep it a few days. Just like we try to keep our gas tanks in our cars half full, so you've got at least something. Keep those pill boxes a few days in advance, so you've got a few days to start getting those things back up and running. So we're gonna get into these examples now. Are you gonna wanna help? I'm guessing a lot of the answers in this room are yes. So if you wanna help, now you need to form the connections amongst your neighbors, get to know the local resources and build some trust, and get trained on ways to help. Before I talk about going to other people's disasters, I'm gonna give you a couple of words of warning in case any of you are interested in doing this. There are a whole lot of ways that you can help out in other places and learn about how you will be needing help or what you may wanna do in a disaster here. I personally find it to be an incredibly fulfilling way of being able to help other people, is deploying or going out to other disasters. There are nonprofits who will pay for you to do it, but you need to do it carefully. Going to other people's disasters, it's the worst days of these other people's lives. And you're coming in fresh and enthusiastic with lots of adrenaline, saying, let me help. And they give you a look of, oh dear God, I have no idea what I need you to do. So I went up to Santa Rosa for 4 days on the 4th day after the fire. And when I got there, that is literally what I was told. We have no idea what we needed to do. I was sent in a position, so I knew what my position was. I had a lot of background in that position. It was doing shelter management, so managing disaster shelters. I was sent to the city's Emergency Operations Center. They said, we don't even know what we're not doing. We don't know what we don't know right now. So my attitude was to walk in there and listen for 2 or 3 hours. Just hear what conversations were happening, read what had already been written, see what had already been done, and then figure out some places where I could plug in that would help. So being compassionate, listening, understanding that the locals have the most knowledge, know who needs help, and are exhausted. Everyone in that area has not gotten sleep. In Santa Rosa, every single person in that EOC had folks living on their couches, because everyone still had people in the evacuation zone. A bunch of the people were actually evacuated as well. Several of their city staff also lost their homes. They generally weren't in there, but it was super, super stressful for folks. So being self-sufficient, being empathetic. It seems sort of straightforward, but you've got adrenaline pumping, and the more adrenaline you have, the less your emotional empathy, it sort of becomes inverse. And so you have to purposefully say, I'm gonna listen to people, I'm gonna be patient, I'm gonna be quiet, and I'm gonna meet them where they are. So that was my one little thing. For all of you who want to go out and do good in the world, please do so. Just do so with a lot of empathy. Now for the fun part. First case study is Alabama. This was my very first disaster response where I went out. If you guys remember, around 2009, there were some major tornadoes in Alabama. They hit Tuscaloosa. They went to Birmingham. They literally actually went across the entire state. I was not in Tuscaloosa or Birmingham. I was in a place that one local Alabama lovingly called, oh, you're going to hill country. We had to have a local escort with us when we went into the different neighborhoods because people would shoot folks that they didn't know on site. So that added a little bit to my excitement of my first deployment. I saw incredible things there. I saw incredible neighbors helping each other out. So a couple of the stories on these slides. First of all, one thing that we know will happen in every single disaster is the communities will start gathering supplies and handing them out to the people who need them. And it can work if it's done carefully. Because here's the thing, people will drop off whatever is sitting in their garage. And that can be a very odd mix of stuff. But I am now at the point where I realize there will be some people who need some of that stuff. And we're just gonna have to manage it as it comes in. The coolest thing, I'm actually gonna jump to a Santa Rosa story right here for a second. Something I saw happening in Santa Rosa, there was a shelter I was at that was entirely run by volunteers. And they started getting more donations than they needed. They had enough clothes, they had enough food, they were good. So they asked people, can you start bringing us Walgreens, CVS, Target gift cards? Because then we can go and get the exact pack of diapers that this baby needs, or the exact version of the formula. And people were like, oh yeah, okay, if you're gonna go and get something specific, cool, yeah, that makes sense to me. And so that was how they did it. It worked really, really well. It was really cool to see. Okay, some other pictures here. Several of these pictures, the puppy, you gotta love the puppy. This poor puppy survived 2 tornadoes. There was one in the morning on this guy's house who took out his barn with his horses that morning. He got in there, saw the damage, couldn't find his dog. Looked everywhere, couldn't find the dog. That evening, another tornado came through, took out the house. He came back the next morning, found the puppy. Puppy was underneath the porch, very, very scared. This was the most loving dog I've ever, just like, it needed your hugs. Every hug you could give this dog, that dog wanted. So it came straight up, she was like, love me. I have been through traumatic experiences and I need human affection. Man, were we happy to give that human affection. But you can see this thing that's happening right now, that this man is doing next to the dog. He's gathering up the stuff that he can that's left in his house. So there's an article that I was talking to Lynn about before we started that's from someone who survived the Valley Fire that's talking about how can you help your neighbors and friends when they've gone through a disaster. And one of them is being with them as they go through this process. This really sad process of trying to find the stuff that is still theirs, that they can still find. Because those few things that you find, they are treasures for the rest of your life. They're the things that stay with you. So that is one thing I want to say. My other personal favorite story out of Alabama came after my worst day on the deployment. I had spent a day where everything had gone wrong, and I'd messed up, and other people had messed up, and I was angry, and I couldn't figure out why I was there. And someone told me, you're gonna figure it out tomorrow. You're gonna figure out why you're here. I'm like, no, I'm not. Everybody hates me, ah! Well, then I did. Darn that person, they knew exactly what I was getting into. So, next day, what we're doing, I was actually there with a health team. I was an EMT at the time, and so I was there to sort of assess health situations that were going on. I did very little health work in this. It was almost all emotional support work. So, I get to this one neighbor who is still one of my heroes of this entire thing. And she's feeling very guilty. And all the neighbors said, go talk to her, because she's feeling really bad. Because her house made it. And all of her dogs were okay, and she was doing great. And she's just like, oh, everybody's devastated, and I feel so awful. I'm like, well, who are all these kids in your yard? She's like, oh, I told all the neighbors to drop off their kids with me. And so I have about 15 kids in here, and I'm watching them so they can clean up their houses. So the kids don't have to see it while they're cleaning them up. And so people are dropping off some McDonald's for the kids, and I'm just taking care of them. And then I've got, a couple, 8 or 9 dogs from the various people whose dogs have been out. But I actually need your help with one thing. And she went from being this sort of miserable person to when she remembered what she was doing, suddenly she was motivated again. She said, I really need help. Okay, very young me. I know I'm young now, but this was very young me. I'm ready to help. What can I do for this awesome lady? It's like, there's a puppy. Okay. I don't know who the puppy belongs to, but I've got this puppy. Like, all right. She's like, I need someone who's got one of those cell phone things that can connect to the internet. So you can take a picture of the puppy and tell them we've got the puppy on the internet. So just tell the internet about the puppy. I said, okay, I will tell the internet about the puppy. This sounds like a task I can do. probably about a 5-month-old black lab, cutest little thing in the world, clearly scared. I have pictures of him still. I didn't bring them today, I'm sorry, because I forgot that I was going to tell this story, so they're on my home computer. All the pictures are of him like almost jumping on me. We had a lot of trouble with me taking the picture without him coming to lick my face. This is a big challenge, but I finally get a good picture. I'm like, okay, I have a task. My task is this puppy. So we drive a couple blocks down to the local fire station, which is actually where that setup on the upper left was. This is that fire station where people were gathering donations. I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll post it on the internet, but this is probably a local pet. So maybe somewhere in this fire station, they're gonna have a printer for me. So I could print out a picture of this dog and we can post it here, like lost dog, look here. So I walk up, and this is very stereotypical, but it's also very Alabama. All the women are very carefully getting everything sorted in the donation area, and all the firefighters are standing very strongly next to their engines. And they're all in a circle. Volunteer firefighters in this area, so I'm not, and they're wonderful. But they're all standing there, and I walk up to them, I'm like, hi, can anyone tell me how to use if I could use the printer here? I just need to print a picture of a dog. I'm like, why on earth do you need to print a picture of a dog? So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna tell this story. This lady, she found this puppy. It's a black lab. We think about this month we want to post a picture, and about 2/3 of the way through this, when one of the guys just says, stop. And I have never literally seen a grown man's lower lip wobble before. And he's like, and he pulls out his phone and goes, is it this puppy? And I pull out my phone, and it's the same darn puppy. He's like, oh my God, where's the puppy? And so one of his friends starts corralling him. It's like, okay, I'm gonna drive you, you are not driving. And then he explains to me that 3 days before the tornado, the puppy had been in the back of the pickup truck and had managed to jump out. And he'd been sure he was never gonna see that puppy again. And so they just sped back to that puppy. And it was by far the best day of my time in Alabama. And man, is that not something you put into a report about how you provided service. I did puppy reunification services on this day. It's very official. This is something we can do as neighbors, right? This is something that changed that man's day, that helped this lady who felt helpless prove that she was really helping out other people. This is where our role is in this time after a disaster. So that's one of the things I want you to sort of hold with you. It doesn't have to be the formal stuff. It doesn't have to be giving as much money as you can give or giving as many supplies. Forming those connections, bringing people back together, that means just as much. Okay, that's usually my show stopping story, so I'm sorry for doing it a little early, but let's talk about Santa Rosa for a minute too, because that's our recent disaster here. And then I will I'm doing okay on time, right? Okay, just wanted to make sure. So, this is the brand new fire station in Santa Rosa. Literally, it was like 2 years old. The Tubbs fire was pretty intense to be at. I was there right as no one was back in. No one was back in their homes yet. And the shelter situation was pretty crazy up there. In the city of Santa Rosa, we were actively managing 4 shelters and providing some assistance with some county shelters. If you look at these 4 shelters, you can pretty much tell almost all of them were in school gyms. Let me tell you the thing about these shelters that's not clear from these pictures. 2 out of the 4 entirely run by local volunteers who had a key that night. They had the key to the school, the fire started, they unlocked the school, said, come here. No training, no experience, they just went and did it. My personal favorite of all of these shelters was Cook Middle School. That was started, and completely, and she ran it the whole time by a middle school teacher with a fist of steel. She had the coolest shelter management system I'd ever seen. She had not taken a single training. She didn't technically know anything, but she knew how to organize people. And she did a fabulous job. And so when I came in, the city was saying, okay, you need to go look at these shelters that are being run by volunteers and see if we need to take over. Do we need to do something? Because we don't know them, they're not us. I walk in there, I'm like, oh no, don't touch this shelter. This shelter is perfect exactly the way it is. And what we wound up doing as a city was providing connections. We provided some city staff to do resource requests if they had things they couldn't get with those gift cards. She was the gift card lady. So, they needed a wheelchair. Okay, that's a little bit beyond a gift card. We'll get you the wheelchair. Or they needed nurses to come. We could facilitate getting some nurses in. But she ran almost all of that with absolutely no help. And that was incredible to see. One thing I want to encourage you all, though, is you could learn how to do it first and then still do it. Even better. This is a different shelter. This is another one that shows what communities do in shelters. It's one of my favorite pictures. This is the Elsie Allen shelter. This shelter, when it was initially evacuated, the timing happened so that the first shelter was one that was run by the city. And then this is the second shelter was open, and 12 different nursing home or assisted living facilities evacuated into this shelter. By the time I was there, it was down to about 6 or 7. But that was still plenty. And so if you look closely at the clientele that are watching this hula show, they're all people who are living with significant numbers of developmental disabilities, and they were having a great time in this shelter. First of all, the first good news is all of their staff were with them. They evacuated with them to the shelter. They were staying with them in the shelter, helping support them. But then the community came and wrapped around too. The community came in with the hula shows. The community came in with the dogs that everyone could pet. The community came in with arts and crafts. The community came in with yoga night and Pilates classes and all sorts of wonderful things. This shelter was initially run entirely by volunteers. They were one that said, help, on like day 2. We have 12 nursing homes. And so the city and the Red Cross technically took over, but did it with the approval and asking of it, and the community volunteers continued to serve the shelter. One of the days I was there, they had a DJ providing a DJ dinner, and the big famous local barbecue joint was providing the barbecue. It was great. But there's a lot of opportunity in this recovery stage and in this post-disaster stage for people to help if they take initiative and think of good ideas that can help people out. So spontaneous shelters happen, lots. Their help is vital, but the structure is key. Because the one thing we have to be careful for in them is it's also easy to get a little lost in a shelter like that. If you're somebody who has significant medical needs and no one's looking for you, or if you're someone who doesn't speak English and no one else speaks your language, none of the volunteers, it's really easy to hide in the corner of that shelter. And so we want to make sure we bring the resources into those places to make sure everyone's getting the service they need. But communities can solve a whole lot of problems. I will say the most fun shelter I was at Annalee High School in Sebastopol. It felt like being in Berkeley, folks. I was like, oh, this is what Berkeley shelters are gonna look like. They had Screaming Mimi's ice cream. They were having an ice cream social out front, and they insisted I have some, shucks. But they did all sorts of fabulous stuff. They set up all there. Again, they were another one that just opened the doors and started helping, was mainly run by the teachers who didn't have any previous training. So pretty cool stuff is happening up there. I've mostly talked about all of this already, the donations management side of things. This again is the Sebastopol shelter. They made a pretty cool setup here. Took a bunch of donations, and they had all of the teenagers sort through the donations, all the high school kids, because this was at their high school. They sorted them, and then they set up this free shop where you came and you could shop, and you'd ask for what you wanted and what sizes, and you'd have your shopping people go get it for you, and then you'd just get to walk away with your grocery bag of free stuff. And it was wonderful. And so this kind of creativity, this kind of helping each other, it worked remarkably well. And the mental health support was key. One last story I'm going to share from Santa Rosa was actually about one of the city staff members in the city of Santa Rosa who came with me. My mom's joke now is that if I don't save a pet in a disaster, it doesn't count. So here's your second pet story for the day. I apologize. But this guy worked for the city staff, had no disaster training, and they asked him to just follow me for a day so he could learn to do the job when I had to leave. So it was great. He was with me, And slowly, over the course of the day, his story came out from the actual night of the fire. He had been hanging at a friend's house and fallen asleep on the couch. Happens often enough. It was a weekend, not a big deal, okay. 2 a.m., he wakes up, wall of fire outside of his friend's house. And he's like, I was lucky, because all I had to do was grab my shoes and my wallet. That was what I had there. I didn't have to grab half of my stuff. I was able to get out pretty quickly, help my friend as much as I could, but the wall of fire was right there. So while we were going through the different shelters, he and I started talking to one of the care facilities at that Elsie Allen shelter, and they were actually an in-home health care service, so they went to people's individual houses and provided supportive services. And so they told us, I'm like, well, what do you guys need? I said, we don't know if our clients' houses made it. That's what we need to know. And so what we did is we went out and took pictures of all of their clients' houses to bring back so they could show their clients the pictures. Look, here's your house, you're still okay. You're gonna be able to go home. So he and I went out, and I told him as we went out, I'm like, I know we're in a fire vehicle right now, this is your chance. If there's something you need to see or check on, tell me, we'll go check on it. And so we checked on his storage space where his grandfather's old Army uniform was. He'd been sure that was gone, and it was actually still there, so that was pretty cool. Feeling pretty good at that point, I'm like, okay, we're doing good. And then at the end, he's like, all right, we're almost at my friend's house where I was that night. And we're in a burnt out neighborhood at this point in time. So we get there, and we're like, this might be okay. We might be there. So he feels confident enough that he pulls out his phone and starts filming. We turn the corner, and we get there. He's like, it's there, it's there, it's there. And then we get out on the driveway, and there comes his friend's cat, meowing up to us right there. And someone had been feeding the cat. Someone had been leaving out water and leaving out food for that cat. And he instantly calls his friend, I'm standing outside of your house right now. It's here. Some of this emotional stuff is what makes people begin to recover. It's what helps make them whole. Your cat is okay. Someone's taking care of it. There's plenty of food. We just filled up the water. The key is that as we look at helping our neighbors, we have to recognize the opportunities and be open to them. We have to say, okay, taking a picture of a puppy is not within my roles and responsibilities, but I'm here to help my neighbors, and so if that's what they need, that's what I'm gonna do. And so as we start thinking about this stuff, my questions for you are, what resources are in your neighborhood? Who has the keys? Now, I will say one thing about these keys. In an earthquake, we need to make sure the buildings are safe first. So that instead of going into that building, it may be looking at the local park and bringing people there and taking care of people there, right? We want to be in a safe spot. Because the last thing we want to do is be in a building that's going to cause people more injury. But still, there are a lot of resources in our neighborhoods here in Berkeley. We have a lot of tiny little parks. Think about how we might use them. How can you prepare today for recovery? Recovery is not the stuff we spend a lot of time thinking about, but there are some steps you can take so that next month or two is a lot more pleasant. And then what planning can you do now? What training can you take now? That's gonna help you after. If you know you're gonna wanna help, you can learn this stuff. You can learn how to do child care for kids after disasters. We're gonna need that. You can learn how to help pets after disasters, how to help take care of them. We're gonna need that. You can learn how to set up shelters after disasters. We're absolutely gonna need that. You can learn how to do donation management now. All of those things are things that we're gonna hope our community helps us do, because we're all gonna be in this together. So now is a good time. First of all, my last slide is contact info. So if you've got that burning question that you don't really wanna ask in front of 50 of your nearest friends, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to go into more depth, talk about more, but I also want to answer any questions you might have.
So we were talking before about the human waste
Yes.
gathering, and we put it in a garbage bag. And so I'm guessing that if the roads are at all passable and it can be done, the garbage would come through and pick up those.
That's a great question. So the question is, well, okay, you've got your human waste in the bag, now what? When is the trash going to start back up? It's going to take a while, but that's actually one of our earlier priorities. Okay, getting you water, getting you medical care, that's on the higher end. But starting up trash services and sanitation services, that's one of the things that's going to be important. The big thing about any kind of human waste or any kind of medical waste as well is separate it, keep it away from other things. So you need to have, like, mark a trash can. Human waste only, wash your hands after, right? Do something to make it clear for there will be a time. One of the things we actually did in Santa Rosa, when we were there, we didn't open up any of the areas that had burned, but we opened up the areas that had been evacuated for 5 days. Fun thought. If, say you've had to evacuate for your home for 5 days after a wildfire, you're thrilled, your house is there. Yes. You walk into your house, what do you think you find? It's a very smelly situation in there, my friends. And so I actually had somebody who works in my kind of job in San Francisco was in this circumstance. She called her, and she knew what to expect because we've done this a couple of times on wildfires. She called her insurance agent beforehand and said, yeah, just toss the fridge. It's not worth it. The fridge is going to be a nightmare because when food's been rotting in there for 4 days with no power, because all of these, they cut off power for the whole area, whew, that adds some fun. And so waste is actually one of the big things that we have to plan for, and that's a city role. That's what the city actually has, the kind of services that we need to do to support your ability to recover. So what did we do in there? In Santa Rosa, usually their trash day is, Tuesday or Wednesday. For them, we actually added trash days on the days that they came back so that people could throw away the super smelly stuff in their fridges. And so that's the kind of disaster recovery stuff that we try to anticipate. Oddly, most of the people who knew to anticipate it did so because we'd all been at the Valley Fire together too. And that had been a problem there. And so we said, trash, have trash for smelly fridges. So that's a good thing to think of. Okay.
You talked about, you just said we can learn to do some of these things. We have the CERT classes. Where do you find it?
Yes, so CERT classes sometimes have opportunities. One of the keys to finding out where to learn how to help somewhere after a disaster is an organization that works at both times. There's a lot of organizations that wind up shifting their focus. And so some examples that I know of, and I'm going to try and do a broad range here. I know our animal services folks, all of them. If you're a volunteer for them day to day, they also are part of our disaster plans. They've been helping with the animal evacuees from Harvey and Irma. They took a ton of animals from the Bay Area, from the North Bay. And by the way, to be clear, when they're talking about that, what they generally do is take the pre-existing animal shelter population, so the animals that are already ready to be adopted, and they move those out so that the local animals can come in and be reunited with their people. So that's the concept there. So if you're a volunteer with them beforehand, then you're already going to know what you're going to need to do after. Other organizations I know, Red Cross is a sort of obvious one. That's where you're going to learn some of the sheltering stuff. Salvation Army does a lot of feeding in this area. Goodwill does a lot of donations management. There's also organizations for those of you who are like, I am going to be ready with my chainsaw. That's where, oh shoot, I'm going to totally forget their names. There are several organizations that do the chainsaw response too. They have a lot of fun. If you're not a chainsaw person, there's other roles for you too. So it's looking up so VOADs is what you want to look for, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. Most of them have day-to-day missions because they have to keep going so that they have the people and everyone trained up after the disaster. We have a VOAD group in Alameda County. I bet you can also find out some more about other organizations, even this one here, that can learn about different ways to help out in your communities after disasters. But it really, really helps those organizations if you're already in their database before the disaster happens. VOAD, Volunteer Organization Active in Disaster. In the back, yes. Yes, I will move back. There we go. Yep, it is back. Okay, I know I saw another question somewhere. Yes?
My medical insurance company is extremely tight-fisted and they won't refill prescriptions until the day that you run out. So I'm not seeing how I can accumulate pills.
That's a really good question. So let me give you my two backup answers to that. One is a little harder, one is everyone should be doing. So the one that's a little harder is if you have something that is a sort of life-saving medication, sometimes your doctors are going to have samples that they can give you that you can keep as part of your kit, or you can even just like supplement it so you get an extra day on your prescription, right? So asking your doctor if they have any samples for that you could have for your disaster supplies can be one good option. It depends on the medication. It's not always going to be available. The other thing that is absolutely key that I say no matter what is you need to know what medication you take. So if we start working with the pharmacies, setting up things in shelters, this is what we were doing in Santa Rosa. We were having people who said, I need to refill my medication, and we'd actually send runners, this is one of the things volunteers did, to go to local pharmacies, pick up the medications for people and bring them back. The key is we have to know what medication it is. And so it's really hard to refill the little oval yellow medication that's for your heart. That is a very challenging medication to refill. Our nurses are fabulous. That's still a pretty hard medication. But if you get a printout of what you currently take, it's super helpful. And the other fun fact about that printout that can be super useful is it helps in a day-to-day emergency too. So if you know what you currently take and you have some kind of health crisis and our wonderful firefighters have to come help you out, I actually did my ride-alongs. So I did some ride-alongs with our firefighters here when I first started working, and I went to one person's house where the husband was having back problems and stomach problems, was really, really feeling ill. So the firefighter said, well, okay, what medication is he taking? And his wife came and brought out 2-gallon bags of everything he'd taken in the last 5 years. That is not gonna help. That is not that useful. So if you have the current medication list, that is something that they can actually use to have a better understanding of what a health condition is and what medications they can't give him. Because if you have certain medications, things could lower your blood pressure to dangerous levels, things like that. So you can ask for that list to be printed out anytime you go to the pharmacy. They'll give you a printout. Or you can do the even easier one. There's usually a slip included with your prescription that says the prescription name. So just keep a stack of those for your most recent prescriptions and you're totally good. Yes, sir.
My doctor is willing to give me kind of an advance dose, like if I'm going on vacation or something, so you can save those and just kind of recycle them as you go through so
Right.
they don't expire.
Make sure they don't expire. That's a key. Do it safely with talking to your doctor. But a lot of times our doctors want to help us out. They do not want us to get into terrible medical straits because the earthquake happened yesterday. So it's a conversation that's sort of weird. It's not one that's on their list of questions to ask you when you go visit your doctor, but it can be on your list. So it's something to think about. Yes.
I have trouble with the thought of my very old water heater
Yes.
being potable, just with a few iodine tablets or something. And I'm not sure how long that water's been sitting in there. I'm not sure it drains completely when it refills, no matter how long I shower. So can you talk a little bit, if I use really old water heater, what am I?
So the question is using an old water heater, and here's the thing, if you ever pull hot water from your sink, guess what? You're drinking your water heater water. That's where that's coming from. So it's not just the water you're showering from. So your water heater actually cycles pretty well. I mean, that's what it's designed to do, is cycle water through it. You can run into problems with water heaters once the water system stops working, just like you can with any source of water. If it's sitting around there for 2 weeks, you were on vacation when the earthquake happened, it's been sitting for 2 or 3 weeks, you get back, I would probably be a little bit cautious about that water. I might add the bleach to it, right? And so that would be like, generally you can go straight from your water heater because that's what's coming out of your sink half the time anyway. But if it had been sitting around for a while, I would add bleach just to make sure no ickies had gotten in there.
And not the iodine tablets from the camping gear or something like that. Bleach.
Bleach is the easiest one. If iodine tablets are what you have, then iodine tablets are what you can use. Okay, yes?
If the tap water is working and you have like a really good water filter, does that work?
So you're gonna wanna look for what we're saying. So the city, one of our big priorities is gonna be to tell you what's going on with water. We're gonna want you to know. And so it may be, yeah, you can just drink the water. It may be, we need you to boil the water. And there's our instructions on one of those flyers for what a boil water notice generally means, which is generally you have to get it to a high boil. So you've got rolling bubbles and then leave it at a high boil for a minute and then let it cool down and then you're good to drink the water. So if you get a boil water notice, that's generally what it means. We will explain it we do not trust that anyone's going to remember that. I hardly remember it. We will look it up. We will get the experts to confirm exactly what you need to do to make that water safe. And we will share it on the radio. We will share it on AC Alert. We will share it everywhere we can so that you know how to get safe water.
But the filter
The filter,
doesn't mean anything.
the filter can help if you're not sure about the water. But we're going to do general answers that work for everybody. So not everyone's going to have the filter. And we're probably not going to be handing them
All
out.
those pictures that are PUR pictures, you just put it in the picture and it.
There's a lot of options. I can't guarantee they're going to work for everything that might happen to our water system after a disaster. Okay, yes, you were next. Bleach does expire, so you want to make sure you actually have unexpired bleach. It loses its potency, and the last thing you want is bleach with less potency than you think it has when you're trying to purify your water. Let me jump over there and then I'll come back. Yes, sir.
Two things about water. The first thing I do in an event is isolate your house from the water source coming in. Because if there's a break upstream, eventually you've got to get some really nasty stuff coming in your system.
Yep.
So isolate your house, number one. Number two, on your water heaters, they get some scum in the bottom of it. It's pretty nasty. It's good to periodically take a hose, drain your tank, flush out the bottom. But if nothing else, you should be able to use that water. But again, isolate it, and you can also isolate the water tank itself to preserve it, but you don't want to contaminate it.
So just like we were talking about on the toilet, when you're using it as a kitty litter box, turning off the water so you don't get more water in, you can do that to your water tank as well so that you don't get water that may be questionable filtering in. You can do it into your systems in a variety of ways. Thank you for sharing that option. Okay, and going in the order I'm seeing these hands so that I don't forget people. So next up is all the way in the back and then Jenny. Yeah.
So don't forget to get unscented bleach, just pure bleach.
Yes.
And also, if you're storing for a long term and you want to use that water, open the water, let the bleach evaporate before you drink it.
It should not smell like bleach when you are drinking the water. Okay, make sure that the smell of bleach has gone away before you drink it. That's a good key. Okay, Jenny, you're up next.
Two things. You did mention 55-gallon water tanks,
They're awesome.
and they, under its tarp, in the shade, they last even longer.
Food grade plastic. Get on Craigslist.
Yeah. Or Costco.
I'll repeat it. Yeah, go ahead, keep going.
The other thing was an accidental discovery when our neighbor went into cardiac arrest, and Station 4 and Station 2 saved his life, but his wife could not find his Kaiser card. It wasn't in his pocket when they took him into ER at Kaiser Oakland. He was checked in as a John Doe. Those of you who are members of Kaiser might want to all tattoo your Kaiser number.
I love it.
Still have not completely merged his record.
Right. Okay, so the two concepts there were that there are 55-gallon food grade drums. They're generally blue. They're very cool. That is what is at my mother's house right now. That's what I've set up for her because it makes me feel nice and cozy that my mom's going to be ready. She lives in SoCal for the big one. The key with them is you don't want to store them in the heat, so you don't want them baking in the sun, and you don't want to store them directly on concrete because off-gassing can affect the quality of the plastic. So I stick a couple of pieces of lumber underneath it, and I'm good.
For how long?
They are rated for the water to store for 5 years, and then you need to switch it out, but you can continue to use the drum. Okay, you were next. Yes, I'm trying, and then you're after that. Moving my way through. Yes.
Okay. The thing with isolating your house was turning off the water.
Into your house, yes.
Right. But if you have a hot water tank and if there's still gas and you start drawing down the water in your hot water tank, isn't that going to be an issue when it's like no more water?
You're probably going to want to go ahead and shut off that heat source on your hot water tank because otherwise you're going to have really hot water that you're drinking as you're using your water tank. So that's a good point. And it's a good time for my favorite reminder, which is we're going to shut off the gas to our houses if you smell a gas leak. But that doesn't mean you can't also shut off the gas to a utility and keep the gas flowing to your house. So you can shut it off to the water heater, and then, but if you don't smell a gas leak, you do not need to shut off the gas to your house. You can keep it on because otherwise it gets to be a big pain to turn it back on again. Okay, I'm gonna jump behind you now. Yes,
This is probably an impossible question, so.
fair enough.
All I really want is like a direction to look into.
Mhm.
I think that most people like in my immediate neighborhood or block, have no time or interest to pay any attention to this.
Yeah.
And so like, we're not having meetings, we're not having national night out, we
Right.
don't know each other, it's low income
Mhm.
apartment buildings.
Yep.
So, what are probably like the most important things to like have my neighborhood actually ready and like, or places to look?
That is a really great question, and I appreciate it. So I'm going to repeat the question, which is, in a neighborhood that doesn't have the time and hasn't engaged currently in the ability to do this disaster planning. And so what are the things that you can do to get somewhere in the disaster planning? I would say the steps I would take as a person, just as an individual, would be first just to sort of make some efforts when the occasion permits to get to know some neighbors, right? That's even just like saying hi to the dog walkers, saying hi to the folks down the street, getting to form some basic connections. You see the moving truck bring cookies. It's super old fashioned, but it works. It's like the one day where it's not that weird to knock on a neighbor's house. So doing some of that is key. There are also, the thing that Berkeley has that oddly works more than you would expect is something called the dumpster program. The dumpster program lets a neighborhood have a free 16 cubic yard dumpster for the weekend to throw away all the big stuff that sort of piles up in your garage. All you have to do is meet twice or have some people participate in CERT training. So dropping off some things saying, hey guys, wouldn't this be great? All we have to do is try to meet a couple of times, and we can even throw a potluck for one of them, throw some flyers on telephone poles, see if you can get a couple of people out. Doesn't have to be a big deal. I baked some cookies, just come for a cookie potluck. It's gonna be 15 minutes, it counts. If you do National Night Out, that counts. And it doesn't have to be a fancy National Night Out party with a bouncer in a blocked off street or anything like that. It can just be, drop by my front yard, I'll have cookies. I wanna say hi. Put up some posters on the different walls. You might get a few more people than you'd actually expect, especially if there are cookies. And oftentimes those things start, and then generally you'll find an issue, and it doesn't have to be a disaster issue, to be clear, that people care about. It may be, wow, the cars go down our street really fast, and we're really worried about that. Or that one mattress has been on that one corner for how many eons, right? And so if you can find some things that you can organize about together, that can help be a start. And I do not care if you've organized about bike lanes or speed bumps or mattresses, because if you actually know each other's names or can at least nod to each other down the street, you have formed a relationship that after an earthquake, I am pretty darn sure they're all suddenly gonna be very interested in helping each other out. And that's sort of the beautiful thing. So if you've built the start of something, even just a little start of it, it's gonna help you going forward. And you can continue to get trained with us and with this group of wonderful people and be ready to be a leader. And I think that's the other key idea. Yes, you were next for me.
One more tip about refilling prescriptions. For those of us in the 30-day refill plan, you can refill them on day 26. Do it, you've got 3 extra doses. If you're on the 90-day refill plan, you can refill after 81 days. Keep track, do it, you've got 9 extra doses. So that's one way to deal with the issue that we're
I'm pretty sure that's the Kaiser plan. So for a 30-day prescription, you can renew on day 27. For a 90-day prescription on day 81. So that can give you some extra days. And it's not like they count out the next 90 days. It starts from the day you refill. So that gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Yes?
In response to this, ahead of me, the thought that comes to my mind is you could volunteer to even just exchange, phone numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And even just starting an informal block roster.
Right.
Just, if you can offer your phone number to anyone and see if they'll be, just to have it.
And then, okay, this is me being a techie kind of person. I've been mainly avoiding too much tech for this conversation. There are more conversations happening on Nextdoor than you know. So if you are not on Nextdoor, it's one of those places. My mom was convinced, no, I don't want it. No, I don't want it. Why would I want to know what my neighbors are doing? It is now her favorite thing. She tells me all the reports every time I come home now of, oh, that dog, everybody knows who the dog is now. And you know, that cat who keeps coming and saying hi, I know his name now. Yes, right? Whatever it is. I'm giving you the happy parts of Nextdoor. There's also the parts of Nextdoor. But it actually can be a good place because where a lot of folks look for their local information. So like, why, everyone's favorite question in Berkeley, why is there a helicopter hovering over us right now, right? What everyone wants to know. And so that can be another spot that oddly your neighbors are that you wouldn't think they'd be that interested, but it's the good place where you can ask that weird question or find out anyone know a good plumber in this neighborhood, right? And so sometimes it surprised me how much my community has been there, even though they don't really get out of their doors all that much. Sometimes they're there. So it's another place to look for folks. Yes, in the back.
Since you brought up the techie question.
Techie questions, I'm happy.
Is there a private way of having the information such as your medication list, or your Kaiser card number, or your whatever kind of number you really don't want out there?
The screening on what on earth is this? Which is where you can put your emergency contact number on your phone without the phone unlocking, so that if you get to the hospital, the nurses can look at the phone and say, oh, here's the person I should call for this person. You can also put into there information about your medical needs and stuff like that, and it can talk if you can't. So your phone is a good source. The other backup thing I would say is thumb drives are the little drives that you can put into a computer to put information on. They're great. They're pretty cheap nowadays too, especially if you're not storing tons and tons of video on them. You're gonna be able to put quite a bit onto there. So getting a couple of those, making some copies, giving them to trusted people, family members, friends, or even a safe deposit box somewhere else can be really important. They even have some that come in things that look like credit cards. So they come in little cards, you can keep one in your wallet. So there's a lot of options for that.
You can even take pictures of your medicine, keep it on your cell phone that way.
Then you remember what you've got. Just remember that charging brick. Or there's solar cell phone chargers, those are pretty cool too. But I really want for Christmas this year, super fancy solar generator. I'm not gonna get one. Any other questions? Yeah.
So this gross household income information you bring to that DRC, is that, can you just say what it is, or do you have to have proof?
Honestly, so this is what it said that you have to fill in. I think when you fill in the initial application for assistance from the federal government, they're not going to make you provide proof, but they will eventually. And so honestly, especially if you filed electronically, that last copy of your tax returns, not a bad thing to throw on that thumb drive. That's got all sorts of useful information on it that you could use in the case of a disaster. With that, I'm going to say there are some really cool solar lamps in the back of the room. There's a ton more resources. I will email everything out to be on the website so you can get the things I've talked about today. I'll stick around for another 10 minutes if you have any one-on-one questions, and thank you so much for coming here today.